Now, this is a very, very special story that I've put together for you, the viewer of 5 Live. Nobody knows isolation and life in lockdown like a naval submariner. They spend weeks, if not months, together in a 100-meter metal tube deep inside the sea, totally cut off from their families, with not very much to do and not very much to look forward to. So they're the masters of living life in a lockdown from which there is literally no escape. Take a look at the advice they have for the rest of us. Locked down, under isolation, cloistered at home, with no freedom to move. As humans, we rarely count our blessings. We'd rather complain and throw a tantrum. But this lockdown existence is a great time to spare a thought for the world's true masters of isolation. That's right, naval submariners. Men who spend weeks on end holed up in a 100-meter metal tube. Trained for a super lonely, stressful life where months are often spent deep under the sea. First, let's remind you of what a submariner's life is like. Very ordinary food for days on end, dirty toilets, waking at odd hours, having to remain unbathed for weeks on end, endless days without a single sight of the sun or stars, totally cut off from their families and the outside world, in dreadful isolation. Surely submariners must be trained for this. Is mixed. While the Indian Navy does not specifically train submariners for isolation, it does put them through psychological and mental strength tests during entry. With their handling of isolation monitored through 6 months at sea, rough weather and extended long dives, so the training is progressive rather than a one-off. So how do Indian submariners handle a life of isolation? Let's listen to it directly from a veteran submariner who shall remain anonymous.
What are the challenges we faced? It's a mind game, really. You need to keep yourself positively occupied. If you fall prey to boredom, you will get depressed. Thinking too much about home or counting DLTGH, that's days left to go home, also results in depression. So here's what we did. We held group activities, cooking competitions, a fancy dress contest, a quiz, push-ups competition. We even ran a weekly newsletter.
And now we bring you some first-hand tips from naval submariners on living in isolation and how best to navigate this new existence. For starters, submariners insist that you should stay occupied, and a good way to do this is to organize your day. It gives you momentum. Submariners advise you not to make lame excuses for not exercising. They use railings and ladders for pull-ups inside the submarine, so your shut gym excuse falls flat. Submariners also suggest a scheduling of things to look forward to, like a good meal or a video call with friends. Plan ahead, they say. But that isn't all. There's more advice from submariners, gleaned from a lean life with very little to look forward to apart from the days left to go home. With fresh foods running out during the first few days, submariners advise choosing brown foods that become their staple. It would cut out the need for a constant resupply of fresh foods. Submariners also suggest you take an hour to sit at your window or balcony for air and sunlight daily. Please think of submariners who don't have the option ever. And finally, submariners say, don't discontinue skills or habits you've cultivated in the lockdown. They will always be useful in life. You've heard it from the masters, men who don't have a choice, and with the only thing to look forward to, their DLTGH, or days left to go home. Maybe we should listen and learn. Bureau Report, India Today. And I want to start by asking India Today's executive editor Sandeep Unnithan, who has actually been inside. He's been lucky enough to have been inside many Indian and foreign submarines during his career as a defense correspondent. Sandeep, submariners are the true masters of life in isolation, aren't they? How isolated does it get down there?
Well, isolation is par for the course when you're part of the silent service, which is what the Indian Navy's submarine arm is also called. Indian submariners, when they're out on patrol, submerged, will undergo some of the most loneliest experiences an Indian will ever experience. Hours turn into days, days turn into weeks, and weeks sometimes even into months. All of this when they're mostly under the surface of the sea. It's like being inside a moving railway compartment with no windows. You're completely cut off from the rest of the world. You see the time of the day only by looking at a watch, because you can't see the sun, the moon, the sky, or the stars even. That's how isolated it is. It beats any quarantine, it beats any lockdown.
No, it truly is incredible, and we've got mad respect for submariners, but not many people actually know the kind of life that they lead. Commander Ashok Bijalwan is a veteran submariner, and he's taken the time out to join us here on 5 Live. Commander Ashok, what tips would you have? I mean, you've been for weeks on end inside submarines. What kind of tips would you have for those of us who are in isolation and looking for some advice from the masters?
To effectively cope with isolation, you may follow these few steps, which I am saying in no specific order. 1. Do some indoor exercises or yoga to keep yourself fit. This will improve your immune system. Try meditation. It helps in de-stressing and keeping mind focused. Next, learn something new. Internet has a plethora of information. Enroll for an online course on what you always wanted to do but were not able to find time for, or at least visit news sites and learn what's happening around the world. Spend quality time with your family, play indoor games, watch movies, do something which tickle your brain.
Yeah.
And last but not the least, use spare time to reach out to those whom you have not spoken with for a long time.
You know, that's actually beautiful advice from Commander Ashok, who's a submariner. He's actually listed many of the things that submariners don't have the luxury of doing. Keeping in touch with their loved ones, taking an online course, reading the news. They're completely cut off. So that's actually great advice, and we need to count our blessings. Captain DK Sharma, the very well-known former spokesperson of the Indian Navy, is also with me. Captain Sharma, after the 6-month initial training that takes place, after a submariner becomes a submariner, what happens towards isolation preparations?
Now, what I am told is that whatever they have learned in the 6 months, now if you have to physically see and master that, you need a lot of time. And during working hours, the submarine crew is around 40-50. Nothing much can be done. So this is where they get attuned to themselves, that they spend maximum time in isolation, learning things on their own. And I believe that their expertise when they get their dolphin is so good that they can tell you only by sound that what is wrong somewhere, if ever it is wrong. So they become masters in that. And let me tell you, hats off to them. This is the toughest training and the toughest branch in any navy of the world, that once they go out to sea, they are all by themselves. Yes, this is how what I have been made to understand, that the isolation part, they overcome this fear of isolation, and they work with their own buddies, which are in the new boats like the Scorpions. The crew strength is not more than 50. So this is how it happens.
Sandeep, coming back to you, you've interacted with submariners over the years. How do they actually cope? What are some of the tips that they have on how they handle that life?
Well, I spoke with an officer who'd been on one of the Indian Navy's longest submerged patrols. They spent 53 days underwater, which is a record in the Indian Navy, on a nuclear submarine. And he told me one thing, that it's essentially a mind game. When they were not on their duty stations, they had to focus, they had to keep their minds away from things like thinking about days left to go home or their friends and family back home. they had to stay focused, they had to stay engaged, and they had to stay positive. So what they did was they had quiz contests, they had group activities, cooking shows, fancy dress competitions even. They had push-up competitions, exercise competitions. They ran daily newsletters, activities that would keep them engaged, that would build up team spirit, camaraderie. The most important thing, of course, is for them to stay focused and positive.
Commander Ashok Bijalwan, you've often said that it was no big deal. Isolation becomes second nature for submariners. But just describe for us what that isolation is actually like inside a submarine. For most of us, it's impossible to even imagine what it's like.
Coming to the second part of your query, coping with life of isolation on board submarine is not very difficult in my opinion. At least I never felt so. For long deployments, apart from the operational and maintenance tasks, the executive officers or the seconds in command usually plan an activity schedule to mitigate monotony among the crew. These activities include screening of movies, conducting yoga sessions, quizzes, indoor games like carom and chess competition, cooking competition, etc. Most of these commanders, they know their men well and base these activities upon the men.
Captain DK Sharma, who's better than submariners, for isolation advice, right through service? You've brought us, as the Navy spokesperson, I remember you bringing us all these beautiful stories about the submariners. They obviously have some really good advice as far as isolation is concerned.
Learning about isolation and in the context of the COVID-19, which the pandemic is all around the globe, and people are talking about the lockdown, I think we can take a lot of motivation from the submariners who get deployed and are away from the world for good about 90 days, 120 days, 6 months, 1 year. The least we can do is that when a pandemic of this kind is spread all over, we can maintain physical distancing, and we can wear a mask and abide by all the instructions which are coming from the Ministry of Health or the WHO. It's not very tough if you compare to what the submariners do for us. Of course, they are stuck with their own crew, and so are we stuck with our family members. So it is a lot of similarities are there, but the life over there, believe you me, is much, much, much more tougher than what we are in our four walls.
I have time for one more question from Sandeep, who's been on many of these submarines, both the old ones as well as the modern ones. Sandeep, as we speak, there are Indian submarines out there because they don't have the luxury of being at shore at this time. They've got to be out there patrolling the high seas. Has isolation decreased in the more modern submarines, or is it basically the same, Sandeep?
Well, it all comes down to what kind of submarine you're on, really. The Indian Navy operates two kinds of submarines.
Yeah.
They have conventional submarines and they have nuclear submarines. Now, conventional submarines are smaller, they're cramped. There are not as many crew facilities as there are on nuclear submarines.
Yes.
The only advantage is that they have to surface quite frequently for air to recharge their batteries. They run their diesels which recharge their batteries. This gives the crew some relaxation time. On the surface they can actually come up, they can look around, breathe some fresh air, do some push-ups, swim around even. That luxury is not available to submariners who are on the nuclear submarine fleet, because nuclear submarines, as you know, have almost unlimited endurance because of their propulsion. In fact, their endurance is limited only by their food supplies and, of course, the endurance of the crew. The flip side of this, of course, is that nuclear submarines are bigger. The ones in the Navy certainly are, and they give the crew that much more space. There are more comforts than you would get on, say, a conventional submarine. There's air conditioning. It's far more comfortable than being on a conventional submarine. Of course, the flip side being that you spend extended periods of time underwater, like that 53-day patrol that I spoke about.
Yes.
So that really what it boils down to, the kind of platform that you're on.
Well, Sandeep, Captain DK Sharma, Commander Bijalwan, thank you very much for joining us here and joining me here on 5 Live. I'd like to also take the opportunity to thank every submariner out there for their service. What an incredible job they're doing, and we're so happy we're able to get some advice on navigating the lockdown from the true masters of the lockdown life. Thank you all and salute to them from us here on India Today.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.